The Speaking of Cults podcast is presented solely for general informational, educational, and entertainment purposes. The use of information on this podcast or materials linked from it is at the user's own risk. The views, information, or opinions expressed by the host and guests are solely those of the individuals involved and do not constitute medical or other professional advice. Hello and welcome to the Speaking of Cults podcast. I'm your host, Chris Shelton. Thank you for joining me today. And I am really pumped today. I'm actually really excited. These are the kind of conversations that really kind of make my day today. And I hope it does for you too. Today, we're talking to Dr. Jonathan Stea, and he is putting a book out in the very near future in September. This book is called Mind the Science: Saving Your Mental Health from the Wellness Industry. And as you can guess, we're going to be talking about pseudoscience and the nonsense that it goes on in the big wide world out there when it comes to wellness, health, mental health especially, and the various kinds of quote unquote treatments that are offered out there. And most importantly, for me, how you all can learn to navigate that minefield by recognizing the red flags of nonsense versus what are legitimate sciences or legitimate treatments that might actually help you. That's the whole point of this today. So, Dr. Stea, hi, welcome to my show.
Thank you so much, Chris. I'm equally pumped to be here. One of my favorite topics as well, as you know, to chat about. And and most importantly, like you said, I mean, the ultimate goal here is to help people protect themselves from these kinds of scams and cons and just deceit that exists in the wellness industry, and particularly in the alternative medicine industry, and also how that intersects with kind of the anti-psychiatry movement. So that's a lot, I delineate a lot of that stuff in the book.
Yeah, there's a lot here. And I think you mentioned in one of the promotional pieces for this that there is something on the order of 600 brands of psychotherapy out there. There's a lot. It's not that we struggle from a lack of people telling us what to do when we're having or struggling with mental health issues or physical health issues. And it's really something following you on Twitter, on X, I guess I should say, how much pushback, how many people get so emotional about this. And I suppose it's understandable, but violently so even. I mean, they threaten you and this kind of thing. It's really kind of disturbing how passionate people can get about this. I guess I want to start, maybe instead of diving into the awful, maybe start with, who are you? Tell my audience, how you're a clinical psychologist. What's your background and how'd you get into this?
Sure. Yeah. Why do people hate me so much on X? And why do I get these death threats and these people cyber stalking me for years? And I don't know. You're right. Passionate is a great word for it, and maybe it's an understatement, but that's the word that I'll choose to use. No, I mean, there's good reasons for that, and maybe we can get into the actual reasons why people are so emotional about it, because there are, seriously good reasons. I'm a clinical psychologist. I've been in full-time clinical practice for over a decade. I work full-time in a public health, the public system, treating in what's called a tertiary care outpatient program. And so what that means is we treat people. The mandate is that we treat people with concurrent addiction and mental disorders, usually moderate to severe, kind of coming in. And these are also folks that have usually had some sort of treatment before already. So, we're not the first stop in their journey. They've kind of been on this journey for a while. And that's why we're considered tertiary care. It's kind of a step up in the intensity of treatment compared to kind of lower tiers, say. And I work on a very fantastic interdisciplinary team. So I work with other psychologists and social workers, psychiatrists, addiction medicine physicians, nurses, nurse practitioners. And what we do is, psychotherapy, pharmacotherapy, case management. I run individual therapy, group therapy. I supervise students and residents. So that's sort of my day job. I have an adjunct assistant professor appointment at the University of Calgary. So I get to dip my toes in some research endeavors and get to sit on masters and dissertation committees and be at the forefront of, cutting edge research that students are doing. So that's really wonderful. And then I guess the third hat that I kind of wear would be just really passionate about science communication. And, I really consider it an ethical duty of psychologists. I'm in Canada, and, the Canadian Psychological Association has our code of ethics, and the fourth order principle is responsibility to society. And in part, that involves promoting and practicing evidence-based care and evidence-based practice. And the converse of that is also having a duty to society to debunk or to dispel myths regarding things that aren't evidence-based healthcare. And so that really involves kind of correcting mental health misinformation and correcting pseudoscience. So that's really what's driven a lot of my advocacy work in this area. And I've been doing that probably for several years now on social media. For me, it really started out in kind of, funny enough, in the cannabis research area, because that's where I did my dissertation work. And I come from an addictions kind of background in research and clinical work. And so I was dispelling a lot of the myths around cannabis addiction, because people thought that it doesn't exist or that it's all in your head. And there's various kind of myths around that. And so that's what actually got me into science communication, just trying to, write op-eds and articles and, do podcasts about dispelling cannabis addiction myths. But then once I kind of joined social media, I realized that the misinformation is so much bigger than cannabis misinformation. It just extends to mental health and just health in general. And so it just really opened my eyes to all of this misinformation that's kind of floating around. And just there's so many other people doing wonderful work in this area, like you and others. It's a really great science communication community. But so after doing this for years and learning so much along the way, I kind of decided it was time to localize all of this stuff and kind of put it in a book, because it's hard to do daily on social media, kind of answering everyone's kind of questions, or even just kind of going out of our way to proactively do it. And so I was like, I just need to put this in one spot, which is a book, to really, like you said, just help people identify, really understand the language of pseudoscience and understand the language of grifting, so to speak. And because that's one excellent way to help people protect themselves from this harm. That was a long-winded answer. Sorry, Chris.
No, thank you. I appreciate it. I tell you, as an interviewer, there is oftentimes nothing worse than no as answers. So I very much appreciate it.
My pleasure.
And so much common ground here. You come from a science background in psychology. I, of course, have a cult background, which is, the least legitimate thing in the room. But I've spent the last 10 years trying so hard to learn and unlearn all the culty crap and really get my foot firmly established in a science-based world. I don't consider myself a scientist. But I've done my master's and I've done my work, and I have my points of view about this, and cult recovery, I think, is an awful lot like a lot of the stuff in a lot of the population that you run into, in that there are mental issues and there are even physical issues, but there's also the search, the quest, how do I get over this? What happened to me and what do I do about it? And that's not just cult survivors who ask those questions. People who have medical conditions, people who have been through traumatic episodes, people who have been in combat, people who have had all kinds of experiences in life, experience a need for help, a need for, what do I do about this to fix myself, make myself better, or just get on with my life and not be thinking about, incident X that was so impactful to my life. How do I let it go? How do I move on? And as we now know, with the proliferation of the snake oil salesman trope, which goes all the way back to, literally the 1800s, but you come forward into the internet age, man, we are deluded. We are pounded with messaging and advertisements from people trying to sell us snake oil. So I guess maybe we could, maybe we could start with what is the goal? What is it, first off, before we look at, how people deviate from that goal or push you aside into the pit, right, of homeopathy and crap like that? What's the goal? What is good mental health as defined by a clinical psychologist? What is it that we can hope to attain?
Yeah, that's a great question. And just the fact that people prey on people's mental health, which is just something so precious to us, like it really does drive me bonkers. And I can see it does for you too. So yeah, and mental health and it's a distinct construct than mental illness. And so, and there's a lot to unpack here, because a lot of the snake oil grifters that are kind of coming after us are targeting a lot of mental health concerns. There's a lot of different terminology, but they're coming after mental disorders, post-traumatic stress disorder, depression, anxiety, and they're selling these cures, so to speak, using various tropes, various wellness tropes, various alternative medicine tropes, saying that they're able to cure things that they don't even they don't there's no evidence to back it up. And so it's really it's really disturbing.
Yeah, big time it is. Of course, this is where my, emotional need for justice, you could say, comes kicking in hard. Having spent decades being taken advantage of, in a cult situation, I don't want that for other people. I want to spare them that. It seems experience is really the only true teacher in some of this. You can tell people and describe to them these things, and they, until they get burned, they don't quite believe it. But we try. We're trying to put this out there. So I think I look at it as a matter of trying to get to a place where you're not always happy. You're not always, in this euphoric state of joy. I don't think that's good mental health. I think responding appropriately to the situations in your life is reflective of good mental health, because you're being appropriate in the moment, things like that, right?
Absolutely. It sort of reflects our ability to roll with life's punches, roll with life's stressors, right? It's not the complete, as you're saying, it's not the eradication of uncomfortable emotions. In fact, a lot of mental health treatment and mental disorder treatment involves learning how to identify, tolerate, and express uncomfortable emotions, and to understand them and to process them and to understand kind of where they come from, and to kind of rewrite one's story, so to speak. And so all of that kind of matters. And there's a lot of kind of overlap there between mental health, good mental health, which is kind of this ability to roll with the punches, versus kind of a mental disorder, which is kind of a psychopathology. Right. Interestingly, Halbert Dunn was the guy who I kill myself for not remembering the name of the year. I think it was 1959 in the Canadian Journal of Public Health. But he coined the term wellness, and he defined it. Yeah, and he defined it in a very similar way that we're kind of talking about the discrepancy between mental health and mental illness. So wellness was really about this higher level functioning, which is kind of like this mental health. It's kind of rolling with the punches, rather than kind of a lack of illness, so to speak.
Right.
So it's
right.
more than exactly. It's more than lack of illness. It's quality of life. It's rolling with the punches. It's resiliency. It's all of that, those kinds of things. And so we do all of that in mental health treatment. But what the wellness industry does is really drifted from Dunn's definition, and now it's just really, morphed into dollar signs. And ask one guru what they mean by wellness, you'll get a different answer from the next, because it's really just, it's this nebulous term. It means everything and anything. It's mindfulness, it's chiropractic, it's homeopathy, it's energy healing. It's sort of it's a 5-day protocol of a diet that will not help you. So
exactly, it feels like in a lot of the materials that I see promoting quantum healing, we can go to Deepak Chopra, back that old guy, all the way up to Dr. Oz, and to these purveyors of snake oil, that And not necessarily all because they're malicious people either. I want to be clear that I'm not trying to just paint with too broad a brush and say, oh, all these people are horrible, awful, morally corrupt people. Some people are true believers in complete nonsense, and they will take it. Those are the hills they're going to die on. And so I don't want to frame it as a moral issue. I'd really like to keep it in the realm of, well, there's just facts. There's things that work, and then there's over promising, but consistently under delivering, because you can't fulfill those promises no matter what your intentions are, how good of a person you are. And I think one of the false standards that gets put out there is this sort of blissful, happy, joyous kind of existence. They all the promotional materials of wellness and mindfulness and health all lead to happiness, to this sort of blissful existence. And I call this out as a false standard because that's not the human condition. And I don't mean that the human condition is living in the gutter either. It's that it's up and down. It's appropriate in the moment. It's rolling with the punches, as you say. What do you think about what I'm saying?
I agree with it 100%. They're kind of selling some sort of idealism or an ideal that's unattainable, right? So that's a lot of it too. Yeah, and Colleen Durkach, I don't know if you're familiar with her book, but she wrote a book called Why Wellness Sells. And she looked at sort of the rhetorical power of language. So how wellness influencers kind of use this language. And it is kind of what you're saying. On the one hand, we're told that we can optimize and enhance and boost this life that is just so great. That's on the one hand. But on the other hand, they're selling us products and services to fix problems that we didn't know we even had. And that's sort of this bizarre paradox, right? So they're like, come boost your brain, enhance your life, go to this beautiful heaven by buying our supplements and fixing your broken brain.
Exactly.
It's a rhetoric.
That's right. And it offers, and I think the reason I'm leading with this is because I believe that this is one of the red flags you can actually use to spot legitimate from illegitimate or nonsensical solutions. Is when you go to a place like where you work and you're part of a big team of a lot of people doing a lot of different modalities and a lot of different approaches to, deal with the person in front of you. I'm pretty sure you're not telling them at the reception desk, we're going to, blow up your potential and get you to a state of, blissful happiness so that you don't even have the negative thoughts that create the negativity in your life, right? Like this kind of secret-based crap, right? This kind of stuff. Pretty sure you're not doing that, right?
Definitely not. No, that would be a very dangerous thing. And in that way, it does parallel what you're saying, kind of the cult mentality, the religiosity, sort of, I'll take you to the promised land. And that's not what evidence-based healthcare does at all. It should be about realistic outcomes, realistic informed consent about the risks and benefits of treatments. It's not, we're going to take you on this journey to, again, the promised land.
Exactly. And isn't it funny how often there's just 3 steps? There's just 5 steps. There's just 12 steps, and you're going to be there. We promise. And yet somehow one of the things that sort of weaves its way through every single thing I've ever seen, and you can tell me if this matches up with you, every one of these quote unquote solutions that is offered, whether it's a pill or a magnet or a vial of liquid or a treatment methodology, if it didn't work, you didn't do it right. And it's on you that this didn't work on you, or you didn't take the pills right, or more importantly, you didn't think the right thoughts. This seems to be a common thread that also appears that could be kind of one of those ding, ding, something's wrong here kind of thing, right? The victim approach, I think, is what I mean by this. But I think that's a little bit more nuanced. It's not quite a black and white sort of thing. But how do you see that?
Yeah, it's not. if I were to capture what you're saying, I'd kind of label it, it's almost like this patient blaming rhetoric, or this kind of moralization of health. It's sort of like health becomes a moral problem, and that if you're not following X, Y, and Z, or steps 1, 2, and 3, then you're doing it wrong. And not just that you're doing it wrong, but it's your fault. And that you need to do something to fix it, and that we can gift you that way to fix it. And if you're, like you said, if it doesn't work, again, you're just doing it wrong in a different way. And I think what that does is, yeah, we see that patient blaming rhetoric baked into the alternative medicine community. And it can really lead to a lot of internalized shame for people, which I don't think that many people are necessarily aware of that's happening. And this moralization of health, it has really old roots. Like, it kind of really goes back right to the beginnings of kind of the wellness industry. There was a guy, Bernard McFadden, and he started this magazine in the 1800s and made kind of millions doing it in the 1800s, 1900s. And, he used to walk around New York barefoot so that his soles could absorb the earth's energy. And, he'd sleep on the floor so that his, body could be aligned with the earth's natural magnetic rhythm. And he sold this magazine, and it was very hostile to medical science. It was anti-vaccine, and it basically had just a lot of bad health advice, which is not so much different from what we see today. It's fasting as a cure-all. It's follow this diet. And again, it sort of had that moralization of health kind of baked into it. And yeah, like I said, like we said, it's sort of, it can lead to this kind of shame and guilt. And again, if that's operating on us and kind of pulling our strings, and people might not necessarily be aware of that. And that in and of itself is not a good thing. I'm not going to say that it's it's not a source of mental health and problems per se, but it's not helping. That's for sure.
Big time. Because the thing about a valid treatment, especially when you start talking about chemicals or body treatments, as opposed to maybe psychological issues, which are a little bit more fluid and a bit more variable. There's so many variables in the human brain and mind. But I've always kind of fallen back to this old saw. Well, alternative medicine that works is just called medicine. And I guess I want
Love that.
right. And so how do you differentiate or advise people to just, like, right away when you're looking at something, you see an ad, you see some, thing pop up, or somebody is telling you, because this is really one of the ways it spreads most effectively, is the friends and family line, right? Is your friend or somebody you trust tells you about it. Oh, well, let me just go jump all over that. What are the signs that you're looking at alternative goofy medicine versus, something that's actually got some degree of legitimacy, or, yeah, I should go look into this, or maybe this is something that can help me?
Yeah, great question. And that's essentially what I'm trying to do throughout the book. It really speaks to one of the main themes that I'm trying to get across, which is that alternative medicine, I think a lot of the reason, kind of go back to your original question, like, why do we get so much hate? I think it's because a lot of people don't really understand what we even mean by alternative medicine. And it's not one of the arguments that I put forth is that alternative medicine isn't merely a set of unsupported or pseudoscientific treatments. Like, it's not just energy healing or homeopathy or naturopathy. It's not just this set. It's more than that. It's really an ideology. And there's a narrative attached to it. It comes with its own tropes, yes, designed to cajole audiences. It comes with its own kind of propaganda tactics and kind of lay this out. And so that kind of speaks to your question. It's like, well, what are we looking for? Well, we look for these kinds of tropes. And again, I try to lay some of these out. So my favorite one, which means the one that I hate the most, is sort of, and the narrative usually goes something like, in contrast to mainstream healthcare, or in contrast to mainstream mental health care, alternative medicine addresses the root cause, versus evidence-based or mainstream mental health care just treats the symptoms. And so you'll see that. And so this is one trope that they use. If anyone Googles their local alternative medicine clinic, you'll find these tropes. So alternative medicine addresses the root cause. Mainstream doesn't. Alternative medicine treatments are more natural. mainstream healthcare is not, right? Those kinds of tropes that they're safer, they're more natural, they address the root cause, and they're just wrong. And so those are sort of a good red flag, because evidence-based healthcare is actually more aligned with trying to address the root cause. That's what we're doing every day. We're trying to get to the bottom of what's causing someone's depression, what's causing someone's PTSD. And what alternative medicine treatments often do is they'll say, yeah, we can get to the root cause, but your root cause is unbalanced energy, or it's misaligned chakras, or it's you don't have enough of this, you have a diet deficiency, so you need this supplement. And so it's basically addressing a false or pseudoscientific root cause. So that's kind of one of the things to kind of look out for when trying to be mindful of kind of this alternative medicine narrative. One of the problems, though, to be quite frank, is it's really hard, even if people are aware of it, I don't know that they can necessarily disengage from it, because they may actually believe a lot of those tropes, because people can just kind of come to that place. And so,
mm-hmm. I'm sorry, go ahead.
Well, it's just that. So just that, and then just piggybacking on, because I think this is a super important message too, is it's not just these tropes, though, that alternative medicine does. I think a huge, almost worse part of it is that it legitimizes its narrative through pseudoscientific journals. And I think this is a huge thing that often gets overlooked. So, and I don't just mean predatory journals that, are charging author fees and, they'll just publish anything and everything. I mean, like actual alternative medicine journals, like the Journal of Integrative Medicine or Explore, or the Journal of Alternative and Complementary Medicine, where these journals are publishing studies on unequivocal pseudoscientific topics. So like I give a really extreme, absurd example in the Journal Explore. Like they did a randomized controlled trial on the idea that if someone sends positive vibes to water, you can make its ice crystals look more beautiful. So like this is an absurd idea because it's just scientifically implausible, but it's cloaked in scientific language or scientific methodology. You have a randomized controlled trial. It has a results section, it has a methods section, a discussion, and etc. And so that's an extreme example, but this stuff happens all the time. You have randomized controlled trials on energy healing or homeopathy. And so what alternative medicine practitioners or wellness gurus can do is they can draw from this literature, in a sense, to justify or promote their pseudoscientific treatments. And I think that's a very insidious way of spreading this kind of propaganda and essentially exploiting people's vulnerabilities.
Absolutely. I consider it a kind of infiltration tactic, if you will, if you want to go into counterintelligence and intelligence language, right? Because we are fighting, let's be, pretty blunt about this. There is a propaganda war, over the hearts and minds of the paying population, people with money, people who can pay money. And we're talking about, I think you said, a multi-trillion-dollar wellness industry. This is one of the largest places in the entire world where money is spent hand over fist, is trying to feel better about ourselves, about our lives, about our conditions, about, the problems and challenges that we face in life. How do we get over it? How do we overcome it? How do we deal with it? There's the psychological side and the physical side. And there are these people who are out there propagandizing the problems. They're very, very good at hitting the buttons, at hitting the emotional buttons that people suffer, that people are frustrated with, a lack of adequate answers or lack of adequate access. I talked to a psychologist recently who talked about how 4 out of 5 people have no access whatsoever to mental health care or treatment, merely because of finance, geography, language problems, accessibility, etc. These are big problems, and we need to acknowledge that these are big problems and that the barriers are huge. It's not a walk in the park to go do this right. That being said, it's really on us to do it right and to navigate these dangerous waters anyway.
I just love that. I love what you're saying, because it's again, it's another one of the main messages I try to get across, is that we have gaps in our knowledge. Obviously, science is evolving. Medicine is evolving. The field of mental health is evolving. We have gaps in our knowledge. We have gaps in our treatment. Not everyone benefits. In fact, that many don't benefit from evidence-based healthcare. That's a really sad reality. But, or I should say, gaps in our knowledge, like you said, they signal this call for us to be better. We need better science. We need equitable care. We need better access to care. We need better training, better funding for evidence-based treatments, and looking into this stuff. These gaps in our knowledge doesn't justify exploitation and pseudoscience under the guise of wellness, or under the guise of integrative medicine or functional medicine or alternative medicine. And that's what snake oil salesmen do. They slither in and fill these gaps. And that is what's predatory, and that's what's dangerous. And so that's what we need to kind of help people protect themselves for. And I think the other super important point that you're saying too is, and the point that I really want to get across, is that we can't blame people for seeking alternatives. That would be absurd. I mean, I don't help all of my patients. I can't. And that makes me feel terrible. I wish I had all the answers. I wish we had the best kind of treatments. I wish we could help everyone. And we just don't. And so it would be absurd to blame people for seeking alternatives. So we need to, and I empathize with that. And I get that. There's lots of real reasons why people turn to alternative medicine. It's lack of access, like you're saying. It's also that people are failed by the mental health care system. And that's a very real problem. At the same time, it doesn't justify filling those problems with grift, right? With these 5-step diet plans, or whatever kind of pseudoscientific treatments that we're speaking of. So I think we do need to be, we absolutely have to be sensitive to that. And it's not about blaming or guilting people for turning to alternatives. It's really wanting people to be more aware of when they're being conned, or when they're being sold or marketed a product that is deceitful and that's not accurate with respect to its purported mechanisms of what it can do. And so that matters. We need to be very honest in informed consent, and even ideally, which is not the case, in marketing materials. And that's what the alternative medicine community just doesn't care about.
That's right. That's exactly right. Are there key words, or you mentioned tropes earlier, which was brilliant because it's absolutely true in terms of like underlying themes that drive the marketing of these alternative therapies or these nonsensical solutions. What maybe coming up from that to, well, what kind of words or phrases or concepts or red flags can somebody look at and just go, okay, hang on, no. Just no, right away, right? Like what do you go into on this? How do you describe this?
Well, yeah, there's some of the tropes. So like root cause, again, if you see root cause, that's get your spidey senses up. Like it's, it's a legitimate term. Like we're always looking for root causes, but you'll see it's abused in the alternative medicine community and on wellness marketing materials. So that one's huge. A lot of these tropes too, or at least some of them, they can fall under these particular logical fallacies. Like there's always a 100% natural and safe. That's an appeal to nature fallacy. Just because something is natural, quote unquote, doesn't mean it's good. Or an appeal to tradition.
It's a very natural element.
Yeah, right. I mean, COVID-19 is natural. I don't know that that's good though.
That's true. Sorry, I totally cut you off there.
No, it's okay. I mean, it's important to laugh at the absurdity of this stuff. The appeal to antiquity or appeal to tradition is another one that you can kind of see. This treatment's been around for thousands of years. And so kind of, that means that it's necessarily more effective. Like it really doesn't. A controversial one, which I, again, try to make the case in this book, is just the idea, and it's very controversial because they're embedded in universities, but just the idea of integrative medicine or functional medicine, those terms themselves are essentially a rebranding of alternative medicine. I mean, that's what it is. The medical, I talked about this in the book, the medical historian, James Wharton, he talked about just the languaging again around alternative medicine. It wasn't used until the 1970s. Before that, it was drugless healing or unconventional medicine. There's a whole bunch of other terms. It wasn't until the 70s that it began to be used. And even just in that, the phrase alternative medicine kind of implies a false balance. It's like it's an alternative to medicine, as if like it can serve alongside it. And then later we kind of saw in the 1990s kind of this rebranding take form over time. So the acronym CAM was introduced, which stands for complementary and alternative medicine. So that's sort of adding an even more modicum of legitimacy to it. It's almost like alternative medicine can complement traditional medicine now. And then came integrative medicine and functional medicine. So integrative medicine was pioneered by Andrew Weil, again in the 1990s, who was a Harvard best-selling author. And the idea is that alternative medicine can be integrated or essentially snuck into healthcare. And so for me, those are big red flags, integrative medicine and functional medicine. Now, I say it's controversial because not everything offered under the guise of integrative medicine per se is going to be pseudoscientific or harmful. In fact, one of the propaganda tactics that they'll use is almost like a bait and switch. So for example, diet and exercise changes, right? So alternative medicine likes to pretend this is part of the ideology. They like to pretend that they own that. It's like, if you exercise better and you eat nutritiously, then that's a good step towards health. And the answer is yes, but that's also you don't own that. That's something that evidence-based healthcare has been doing all the time. I run in my groups and individual sessions, I've been talking about diet and exercise changes for over 10 years, but that's one of the ways that alternative medicine get in the door. And then they abuse that kind of idea, and then they're selling you supplements or they're selling you other unequivocal pseudoscientific treatments. So I think that's also another reason why people can get kind of so heated, is because there is sort of that nuance there. It's like, we're not arguing against diet and exercise. In fact, that falls under the purview of evidence-based healthcare. If we're arguing against the selling and the promotion of unequivocal pseudoscientific treatments, or just the overselling and overhyping of treatments that just the evidence base isn't there yet.
Exactly. I wanted to ask you, just because it's a point where I think we might cross, have you heard of a man named Robert J. Lifton and a book he wrote called Psychology and or Thought Reform and the Psychology of Totalism?
Vaguely.
He did a study, one of the first seminal ones, on what is thought reform, i.e., brainwashing, right? Or this concept of forcefully bringing people over into a new way of thinking about things and committing to a new ideology or a new set of moral foundations, this kind of thing. And this was studied people who had been re-educated by the Chinese revolutionaries or, Maoist camps or North Korean camps, this kind of thing. And he came up with an 8-point sort of, here's how it's done, or here, not step 1, step 2, step 3, but here are the categories of behavior. Here are the categories of influence that you can use to create that ideological or moral shift or in a person. And one of them, for example, that we've talked about here today already, is loading the language. You make words mean something different. And you have these sort of special ideas and these special definitions that within this cultural context or this subject context, every field has specialized language. But this is a curved language. This is, the wellness industry. This has become a kind of loaded language. And another one of the points on there, which I was just looking up here, is this idea of sacred science. The label given here is the group's doctrine or ideology is considered to be the ultimate truth beyond all questioning or dispute. And it feels like this is one of the things that also should set off people's red flags, when they are being promised, you mentioned root causes, right? Like, we're going to get to the bottom of this because we know. And the rest of these guys out there, they don't. They're just pretending. They're just faking. They're the fakes. They're the guys who are selling you the snake oil. We actually know, right? We know it's adrenochrome or whatever that stuff is. We know it's ivermectin, right? That's what it is. And that's what's going to cure it, right? And it becomes a kind of sacred truth or sacred science, which people commit to.
Yes.
And I think that's, where our emotional needs come into this, are played against us by these con men.
Absolutely.
What's your take? What do you think?
Absolutely. That rings so true. And it sort of, it speaks to that alternative medicine ideology that I was kind of getting at. And for that ideology to succeed, it requires that polarizing narrative. And I think it plays into, again, sort of in a subtle level, it plays into our tribalistic tendencies as well. Like you said, the propaganda war, right? Because that's essentially what it's doing. If you look, again, if you do a local Google search on these alternative medicine clinics, you won't just see we address the root cause. It's that we address the root cause, unlike mainstream medicine. They throw in that polarizing narrative, and that we can take you to that promised land. They can't. So that is a slippery, slimy propaganda tactic that does speak to these kind of deep-rooted psychological needs. And then, as you mentioned, there's also this language abuse, or this kind of propaganda language that is used, and you see it everywhere on social media as well. I'm sure you've seen it, Chris. Like you can see it in the anti-vaccine movement, you see it in the anti-psychiatry movement, where and the alternative medicine community. So one example, I have some examples in my book too. One is, like, you'll see on alternative medicine websites that they'll use the word disease, but not the word disease. They'll hyphenate it, so it's DIS-ease, and it's sort of there's a backdrop to it. So that's just sort of one way that they manipulate language. Another one is they'll talk about sick care rather than health care. They'll even change like lettering in words. Like pharma will be the middle of the word harm will be in all capital letters. Pharma, it's harma, right? Or they'll use the word science, but the first letter is the cash symbol, so of the S, right? Or science, TM, so trademark. And so these are just, it's signaling, but it's also propaganda tactics, because this languaging is loaded, and what it's doing is it's essentially signaling to the narrative. Here's the polarizing language. These people aren't selling you science, they're selling you science, which is the wrong science, the bot science, the pharma science that's actually going to hurt you and that you should avoid. Come to our science, which is the real science, which in effect is the pseudoscience. But right. So there is just so much of this propaganda tactics at play, and I think it's so important. I'm grateful to you for kind of having this talk, and because it's important to shine a light on these topics so that we can unearth them and kind of bring them into awareness.
Oh man, so much. I wanted to ask you specifically about anti-psychiatry as a movement, because I see it out there. I, of course, have a background with Scientology, which is as rabidly anti-psychiatry as you can get. They literally believe that psychiatrists are the evil influence on this planet that is destroying it. There are no words strong enough for how Scientology feels about psychiatry as a topic. They want to destroy it. They want to salt the earth. It's scorched earth 100% with that. They, of course, present themselves as the alternative to psychiatry, and yet they will not treat mentally ill people or even touch mental disorders or acknowledge they exist. So it's a very conflicted, contrary, and bizarre point of view. But they're not the only players in on the block in the anti-psychiatry movement, I've come to learn over the years. And in fact, it was very funny to me to learn that a lot of the anti-psychiatry guys band together and work together and do their messaging, but they avoid Scientology because Scientology, right? No, we're not the Scientology guys, right? We're separate.
Yeah. Even though they share.
Yeah, can you speak to who these people are and what this whole thing is about? Because it looks an awful lot like people who, had a bad experience, had a rough go, and I don't mean to invalidate any of that or make less of a bad experience. It sucks.
Absolutely.
But to then take that and go, well, the entire field of psychiatry must be eliminated. It's just a fake and a fraud, and it's all big money and big pharma, and it's all just about drugging children. And I know for a fact that that's not where psychiatrists as a body generally come from. I'm certainly willing to have the conversation that there's an over-reliance on pills these days, but that's not the same thing as we must destroy them utterly, right? So where is this coming from, and what's this all about from your perspective?
Absolutely. I should say too, I just came back, it was several months ago. I went to LA and visited the CCHR's psychiatry industry of death.
You did? Museum. You went there?
I went there and I took a photo. I actually took a photo and put it in my book.
That's awesome.
Yeah, I dragged.
I didn't realize that in your book. I didn't see that in your book. That's great.
Oh, I dragged my wife there, and she was not. We only spent 10 minutes because we had to get out of there. Because she was not happy, because you go in and there's Holocaust imagery and there's terrified faces and there's pills. Like it's absolutely anti-psychiatry. So. Anyways, you're right. Like Scientology is only one spoke on the wheel of sort of the anti-psychiatry movement. And it happens to be the most stigmatized one because, like you said, a lot of the other folks don't even want to associate with it. But the way I see it is you can kind of see the anti-psychiatry movement kind of came from the 60s, right? And at that time, it served a useful purpose. It was pushing back against kind of psychiatry's missteps. There was the inhumane asylum care. There was inappropriate pathologizing of minority groups. There was really our knowledge gaps were even greater back then with respect to the nature of mental illness. And so there's a lot of reasons to push back. And so there were a lot of heroes of the anti-psychiatry movement, like Thomas Saz and Artie Lang. David Cooper coined the term anti-psychiatry. I think it was in 1967. So they had good reason to push back. The good thing is, though, it worked. Like it actually helped propel psychiatry as a discipline to be more scientific and to get its act together. Like it kind of it shut down a lot of asylum hospitals. It moved patient care into more hospital-based care, and it forced a more acknowledgement of the biological, psychological, and social contributions to psychopathology, and not just this more siloed care or siloed focus on biology and pill dispensing. And so modern psychiatry is a scientific discipline, and it would agree with you in that it is focusing on this more holistic, in a proper term, so to speak, or a more fulsome or wholesome kind of view of patient care. We're paying attention to not just biology, but also psychology and social and cultural factors, and how all of those intersect. And so in that way, the anti-psychiatry movement worked. The problem is that the movement outlived its cause, and now it sort of exists as this disorganized entity that's kind of floating around in these kind of, I see it's given breath by these different lifelines. So you have Scientology, which is just kind of one spoke, but then you have critical. It comes from more of an academic sphere. So there's a term called critical psychiatry or critical psychology, and so these are kind of a group of academics or journalists and self-identified disgruntled psychologists and a lot of psychologists who will promote a lot of this anti-psychiatry ideas, and they'll do it in a very pseudoscientific way, in a way that evades peer review. So they're publishing in blogs and books and websites like Mad in America that sort of really avoiding peer review and kind of mainstream psychiatric critique. So there's that kind of space where, again, a lot of their critiques are not new or not what psychiatry's already acknowledged. Like, yes, there's over prescribing and over medicalization. Like the psychiatrists that I work with, They do that. Of course, they acknowledge that. We're looking to practice skills over pills and deprescribing when it's appropriate. Like, that's the nature of true psychiatry. So I think that's kind of one spoke that, again, it really legitimizes the anti-psychiatry movement, because, again, these guys can publish in pseudoscientific ways in blogs and books, etc. But and sometimes they get into mainstream healthcare or mainstream scientific journals, but not in a way that they then use those findings and spin a narrative that it's sort of that it's somehow validating their beliefs. So, for example, on the chemical imbalance theory, like there's an ongoing debate about the role of serotonin in depression. And what anti-psychiatry will do is they'll take a straw man argument of that and say that there is no chemical imbalance, and that therefore all psychiatric medications are harmful. The thing about that is that psychiatry will also agree there's no chemical imbalance, and that's an super oversimplified view of how our brain work. It doesn't mean that serotonin has no role in depression. The reality is that it's much more complicated than that. It does play a role because we know that SSRIs work. So anyways, there's that kind of spoke. And then there's the other spoke on the wheel, which is what you're talking about, which is patient harm, right? Or people that have been in some way, they identify as being hurt by psychiatry. And that's a very real thing too. And in that way, it really parallels the anti-vaccine saga, right? There's ways in which people have been injured from vaccines. And so it's sort of this sort of grassroots movement or consumer movement where people are trying to bring awareness to kind of the harms of psychiatry, or in the case of vaccination, vaccines. The problem is that when you go to online spaces that are talking about these things, it's often the case that we want to validate people's harm and their experience. At the same time, a lot of these spaces, they are promoting a lot of propaganda and a lot of misinformation along with what they're saying. So in the same breath that where they might say that they're harmed, they're also saying psychiatry should be abolished, or that it's all crap, or that psychiatrists are evil, and that mental illness doesn't exist, and that all medications don't work, and that they're all chemically imbalanced. So that's where a lot of the misinformation gets purveyed. And so that's really tough. And you see the same thing in the anti-vaccine movement. Yes, vaccine injuries exist. That doesn't mean that that vaccination isn't one of the greatest miracles we've had, medical miracles. So like I think that's where a lot of the nuance gets lost. And so when you go to online spaces, you will see a lot of patients that feel invalidated. You'll see a lot of mental health professionals that are feeling attacked. And in that heated tension, the science gets lost. Anecdotal evidence gets elevated on both sides, and that's just a breeding ground of misinformation.
I could not put it better. That is a brilliant way of putting that. Thank you. Because that's exactly right. That's exactly how it is. And nuance is lost. And I think that if we're looking for, okay, well, what's the TLDR there? How do I know what I'm looking at? Look for lack of nuance, right? Look for black and white thinking. It's all or nothing, right? It's all bad because I had a bad experience, or I had a bad series of experiences. And again, that's horrible. I don't in any way invalidate the fact that people had bad experiences. There are bad doctors. There are predatory doctors. There are cults within that world. It happens. Anybody's human. Human beings do horrible things to other human beings sometimes. And I grant that. But to then take that and blame an entire field of study, an entire science. And then, of course, that's the other question is, that if you're going to do that, well, then you have to end up falling into some kind of new ideology. And we have to call it that because it's not based on any real world facts. Ideology like, well, there is no such thing as mental illness, or it's all, just a con, right? That they're fooling us. I mean, that's flat earth level thing. Yeah, that's just like, whoa, what are you talking about? But yes, that's where you have to go to justify that kind of black and white thinking. And so I think if we see people doing that, we can immediately go, oh, okay, hang on. I think I need to step back slowly from this situation and go maybe to a different Facebook group or a different, to a Twitter conversation or something, I don't know. What do you think?
I agree. And I would add the other major red flag is along with the black and white thinking this is where the marriage kind of comes between anti-psychiatry and the wellness industry, because it's that psychiatrists are all bad and wrong, or so is mainstream healthcare. But here's a solution to your woes, and then they're pitching alternative treatments, and you'll 9 times out of 10 you're gonna see, don't quote me on that stat, but you'll see it. You'll see that marriage, and I think it kind of goes. The reason we see that marriage is what we were talking about before. It goes back to that polarized narrative, because the commonality between the anti-psychiatry movement and the wellness industry is that both serve as a foil to the medical industry at large, right? Both are the other side of the medical industry, so to speak, or mainstream healthcare. And so both can kind of align and say, they're wrong, we're right.
There you go. There you go. All right. Well, unfortunately, we are running out of time, and I've got another full hour of stuff I'd love to talk to you about, to be honest with you, because I haven't really even. Every time I get practicing psychologists and clinicians on my channel, I always want to talk to them about some of this stuff, but we haven't had a chance to. So I'm hoping in the future that you and I can get together again, because I'd love to talk about emotional needs with you and how those are drivers for our behavior and how that leads to so much of this stuff.
My
big
pleasure.
proponent of that.
Yeah, it would be my pleasure, Chris. I thank you so much for having me.
Oh, absolutely. Thank you for coming on. And let's now remind everybody, you have a book coming out here. It's called Mind the Science: Saving Your Mental Health from the Wellness Industry by Dr. Jonathan Stea. Now, where do they find this, and when can they get their hands on it?
Thank you. Yeah, my website is probably the best way to get it. So that's www.jonathanstea, so JONATHANSTEA.com. And from there, there'll be a bunch of links, because you can buy it in Canada, US, and pretty much worldwide, online or in bookstores. And it's going to be released on September 3rd in Canada and the US, and I think a bit later in the UK and other parts of the world, but that's where you can find it.
Brilliant. Okay, folks. Well, you heard it here. Go find it. Check it out. Read it. I think you'll get something out of it for sure. And I hope that this conversation today gave you a little peek into exactly the kind of thing you'll get out of that, because we're just trying to help, and I hope that that's what this podcast has done today. Dr. Stea, thank you again for being on here.
Well said. Thank you, Chris. Appreciate it.
You bet. All right, folks out there, please support the show. Please support my channel, and I will see you guys next week. Bye-bye.